I think we're headed into a stock market crash at some point. What's been happening is that President Trump has successfully manipulated markets. Iran has demonstrated pretty conclusively that to protect itself, it doesn't really need a Navy or an Air Force anyway. And destroying the Navy doesn't include the multitude of underwater submersibles or small boats that are out there that are robotic. I think this is a revolutionary change in the conduct of warfare. And what we're learning is that any nation that invests in persistent surveillance, that means surveillance preferably from space, is going to link that persistent surveillance to any number of different kinds of standoff attack weapons. So this is a fundamental change in the way we've always seen things. On the battlefield, you usually looked up to see whether or not there was an aircraft in the air. Well, today, you don't have to see an aircraft, but you're viewed by everybody everywhere all the time. Your position is always known, and with thermal signatures, it's very difficult to hide anybody. So all of these things come together, and we have an enormous strategic disaster on our hands if you're Washington, D.C. But I think Trump has discovered that he can manipulate markets. He can say, this is a mini war. This won't last too much longer. The Iranians, they really want a deal. All of that is nonsense, but it's worked because the people in New York City on Wall Street that are involved in these trades don't know anything about warfare. By the way, the people on Wall Street don't know anything about mining either because they've probably never seen a mine. They've never been to the field. One of the first things that you've got to do is you've got to go out and see what you're dealing with. When I first became involved with coal, I got on the plane and I flew to southern Kentucky and I started walking into and out of mines and all over the countryside to understand what I was dealing with. Most people don't do that. So all of these failures in the past and in the present come together and leave people not understanding what's really going on. But here's the rest of the story. President Trump can't conceal this much longer. And in the meantime, the Iranians took under fire some more oil infrastructure in the United Arab Emirates. And people need to understand that the United Arab Emirates have been allied with and supportive of Israel and anything that it could do that was damaging to Iran for decades. So this has been an opportunity for Iran to pay them back for all the damage that they've inflicted on Iran. The real question is what's next? And I think President Trump is trying to make that decision. And the problem for him is that the right decision is not the decision he wants to make. The right decision is to say, look, this isn't working. There is no good military solution to opening the Strait of Hormuz. And I understand that there is a humanitarian question now. We're facing famine in many parts of the world over the next 6 to 12 months. I don't want to see that. I don't think anybody does. And so as a result, I'm going to suspend our military operations and I'm going to disengage our forces from this war. We will have to find a different way to resolve our disputes with Iran. But there are two problems with that. First of all, that demands a certain amount of humility, and humility is a word that does not exist in President Trump's vocabulary. And then secondly, you've got Israel is ultimately the catalyst for this entire war. Washington has gone to war with Iran because that's what Israel and its lobby in the United States and its agents here, its billionaire supporters want. And Trump has responded to that. But he was misinformed at the beginning. He was told this would be quick, maybe 5, maybe 10 days. It'll fall apart. He believed what the Israelis told him, but he's in a tough position now because he expected an easy win. He thought the government would crumble. Then we went through the decapitation strikes, killed the leadership. That didn't work. And so now we've fallen back on the simple task of trying to destroy Iran. Well, Iran's the size of Western Europe. I mean, that's like saying we're going to destroy the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Spain, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy. Really? And you plan to do this in a few days? So this whole thing is out of control. And the strategic initiative has passed to Iran because the Iranians can absorb more punishment and endure more pain for much longer than we can. Our gas going through the roof. Yours are much higher than ours, but ours are now moving up rapidly. Commercial ship traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. This is the narrow waterway through which critical share of the world's fuel, fertilizer, feedstock must pass. And the traffic through that strait is down by more than 90%. That's not merely a statistic, that's really a warning signal for the whole world. When fertilizer doesn't move, crops don't grow. When feedstock doesn't arrive, livestock don't eat. When fuel doesn't flow, trucks don't run. Heat doesn't come on its own, food doesn't reach the shelf. So I would say, we have enough of a catastrophe. If you look at the price increases in your grocery stores in the months ahead, it will be worse than it is now. But these rising prices will arrive quietly and mercilessly. Your heating bill will go up. You will effectively be paying a war tax. The cost of waging war against Iran. It's not just us. People in India, China, Korea, Japan, everyone is going to be in this boat. And it's going to be worse than anything we've seen before. Now, when you look at it from a strategic standpoint, we have to understand something. A civilization that cannot secure its own maritime corridors and energy flows is a civilization at risk. And this is why we will be talking, I think, from now on for many, many years about sovereignty. I would say if you're in business right now, you have to pivot from this thing we used to talk about called just-in-time logistics to just-in-case logistics. In other words, we're going to have to stockpile fertilizer, minerals, rare earths, uranium, gold, silver. This sort of thing is now going to be as vital to us as stockpiling oil. A lot of people don't realize it, but after the oil crisis in the 1970s, that's when we began building strategic oil reserves. Right now, the country with the strongest and best strategic oil reserve is China. And China is faring much better than the rest of the world as a result of these shortages. Now, that won't last forever, but it's huge, and they've got a couple of more months to go before they run into trouble there. We're also in good shape, but we have problems. Very few Americans are aware that we import enormous quantities of foreign oil into California. We have no links to California on the ground in terms of pipelines. So if we're trying to move fuel or refined gasoline or diesel to California, we have no pipelines. We have to put them in trucks. They have to cross the Rocky Mountains and drive down into California. So California is very much at risk right now. And our farm sectors are struggling because we have a diesel fertilizer cost shock. 70% of our farmers say they can't afford to buy fertilizer. We've had a more than 50% spike in fuel prices over the last 10 weeks. In other words, resource sovereignty is moved to the center and is going to affect everything. One of the things that happens in air and missile campaigns is that you begin to destroy whatever you can find. Remember, we've already failed to destroy the underground facilities where not only missiles and drones are stored, but where they're actually manufactured. And these facilities are spread all over the country. So it's very difficult to find them. When you do find them, it's very difficult to penetrate them. And we're pretty confident, based upon what's happened during the so-called ceasefire, that virtually all of their critical assets have been replenished or replaced. Now, we've done the same thing. But I think there was hope that Iran might be too severely damaged to recover. That's not the case at all. So the Iranians are quite ready to fight. And I see no evidence that they're going to submit to Israel's demands, which is really why we went to war. It's a very bad thing because of the larger position of the world. And I think that's the piece that people are missing. Washington, D.C., city to a large extent, tend to run a lot on drama and hot air. But the world runs on diesel. How do you get people to understand that diesel is bread on your table and the steel in your buildings? Business strategies have to. They've got to account for massive physical scarcity of food, feed, fuel, and fertilizer by these closures. People in Washington do not yet completely understand that you can print money, but you can't print energy or materials. You can't print the diesel that moves your trucks. You can't print the fertilizer that grows your crops. And you certainly can't print the natural gas that powers your factories. And once again, we're back to this issue that's very dear to my heart, which is all of the rare earths. We got lots of them. The greatest concentration probably in the world is in North America. But that's not the problem. It's refining. We need to be able to refine our own uranium. We don't do a very good job of that. These things now have to happen. So where are you going to spend your marginal dollar? On another missile involved in a campaign that, quite frankly, for reasons of geography and topography, you can't win? When you're bringing the whole world to its knees, essentially economically and financially? That seems rather stupid. You're better off putting your marginal dollar into building rare earth refineries. You're better off looking at all the transportation networks, water and rail, as well as air, figuring out what makes the most sense. You need to look at hydrology, hydroelectric power. Are there ways to power things that don't require carbon-based fuels? If so, where do you put them? Where are those waterfalls where you built these massive dams? Do you put things there to harvest energy so that you can run these refineries? All of these things need to be examined carefully. And then you've got to figure out what you're going to do with farmers. I mean, 70% of our farmers say they can't even afford to buy fertilizer. The numbers of bankruptcies are up by almost 50%. We can't go on this way. So people ask all the time, they say, well, Doug, we've heard everything. You're a military guy. How long can this last? I said, well, it's a question. Which happens first? Do we collapse financially and plunge into an economic recession or worse, depression? Or do we simply exhaust ourselves in the Persian Gulf, trying to make something happen that can't happen with the tools at our disposal? The Chinese have now been into Iran from Pakistan. That goes down to the port, I think it's called Gujarat. It's on the coast of Pakistan, not far from the Iranian border. In fact, it's about 50 to 60 miles from the Iranian border, the road. That means you can truck things from that port directly into Iran, and you can also export through that port. That port was built by the Chinese as part of a large Belt and Road project. Okay. Are you going to attack port now? Are you going to attack the ships that move in and out? I mean, this thing can go as you want it to for some period of time, but you're going to exhaust yourself militarily and you're not going to change the outcome. And you don't want a larger war that puts you into confrontation with China or Russia or anybody else if you can avoid it. So I don't know which happens first, but I think they're both going to happen. We're going to exhaust ourselves and we're going to have a terrible financial crisis, much worse than 2008. That much I can say with certainty. Everybody wants timing, but none of us has the crystal ball that tells us exactly when. One of the questions that we all have in the United States is how much gold do we really have? But when our European friends ask to have their gold repatriated from the United States, and most of it is under the streets of New York City, believe it or not, there's a large cache of it under the West Point, the U.S. Military Academy. Then you supposedly have it in Fort Knox. So we need to take stock of gold. Now, the interesting part is, and I'm sure you're aware of it, there are countries around the world, the Russians included, who've recently sold some gold in order to become more liquid. Right now, the Japanese are probably going to dump large numbers of our treasuries because they need liquidity in order to deal with threats to the yen. This is the other aspect of this problem that we haven't really understood very well, and that is the de-dollarization.